Hello and welcome to part 6 of 3D compositing a car in Blender. Today we're going to be setting up the lighting of our scene and getting all to blend well. Alright, this is where we left off in our last episode when we set up all the materials. So let's go ahead and just get rid of this light. We don't need that anymore, as well as this ground plane. Alright, first off, let's go ahead and align our ground plane that was created when we set up our tracking scene. This plane is set up as our shadow catcher. So basically this is transparent to the camera, but the shadows casted onto it will be opaque. It will not be you'll be able to see shadows on it. So anywhere this is, shadows will be cast. Anywhere it's not, we won't get shadows. So we want to make sure it is lined up with our car. So I'm going to go to top view here and go ahead and move it in line with our car, and I'm going to scale it on the x-axis a little bit and scale it up a little bit like that. And now you could make it super large, but that's kind of a waste of time because it's going to be rendering those sections even if we don't need that area rendered. So make it as big as it needs to be and no more. And we can even make that smaller later on once we see where our shadows land. Okay, next up, remember that 360 photo we took in the very first episode of filming? This is where that's gonna come in. So go over to your world tab and next to color, hit this little circle icon, and we're gonna change that to environment texture. This will allow us to import that 360 photo and use it to light our scene. So go ahead and click open and navigate to where you saved that 360 photo and open it up. Now it won't look like anything has changed, but if we switch to rendered view, we can see that a 360 photo is loaded into the software. Now for me, this happens to already be aligned pretty well, but in your case, the 360 photo doesn't always line up well with your scene. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you how to align it properly. So to do that, we're gonna go ahead and split our window. I'm gonna split it from the bottom this time and change the bottom window to shader editor and change it from object to world. This will bring up some nodes, and this is actually the material of our world. So as you can see, we have a background and then our image. So what we want to do is rotate this image in 3D space. So first off, I'm going to add a texture coordinate node as well as a mapping node. And take the generated output of the texture coordinate and put it into the input of the mapping, and then take the vector output of the mapping and put it into the vector input of your image. Now we can change the rotation right here and rotate where our thing is. So if we can, change this up to something crazy like that, and it will, in a little bit, update and change. Obviously that's not how we want it to be rotated though, so I'm gonna change this all back to 0. And the only thing I think I really need to do is, it doesn't look like my horizon is quite lining up with my car. It looks like it's a bit tilted, little up, so it needs to be tilted down. A quick way to check this is to go to the side view of the car and check that the bottom of your car lines up with your horizon. In this case, my horizon and car aren't quite lining up, so I'm going to go, I believe I used -3 degrees on the Y, and that seemed to fix it. Yep, so now my horizon is lined up, and I can go to the other side and make sure that's all lined up. Maybe -3 is a bit too much. Negative 2.5 would work. Now obviously this is just for lighting. This background won't actually show up in the final footage. It's just for lighting, so it doesn't have to be perfect, but you do want to make sure things are lined up well because it will be used for reflections as well, so you want to make sure it's lined up properly. Now if we go to our camera view, first off, you see that we're kind of getting a transparent background. That's because by default the camera's background images is set to 50% on the alpha channel. So basically it's set to kind of a low opacity so you can see behind it. We don't want that for lighting though. So go ahead and go to your camera settings, and under background images, go down here to alpha and change that to 1, and that will get rid of that problem. Also for right now, go ahead and disable your ground plane just so we can see the car in the scene entirely. Now as you can see here, our car is looking a bit underexposed right now. So let's go ahead and go to our world settings, and if we go to the strength under our background image, we can actually increase the strength up to make it brighter. So if I turn it up to like 1.4, wait for it to update, it will now brighten things up. I think for this scene I used around 1.7 I found work well, but this depends entirely on how bright your original image is and your scene. So the 1.7 looks about right. So now our overall exposure is looking pretty good, but you notice we're not really getting any shadows underneath the car. It's just kind of the light's coming from all directions. So what we want to do is go ahead and add our own light in to sort of emulate where the sun would be casting shadows. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Shift A and add a light and area light. You could do this with the sun, but I prefer using area lights because you can actually control how soft or harsh your shadows are. So I'm gonna go ahead and move that up. I'm gonna go back to solid view here. I'm gonna go ahead and move this light over here. And what I wanna do is line up my light with my sun in the real world. So if I go ahead and move my cursor and it's kind of hard to see, but if I go ahead and just move my view around until my light lines up with my sun in real life, I can then, with my light selected, hit R twice and rotate it until the line is pointing directly at me. That way, I know the angle of the sun is lined up with the angle of my lamp. Or more accurately, my lamp is lined up with the sun. It doesn't have to be perfect, just get it in the general direction of the sun. All right, next I'm gonna go ahead and split my window here again. On my left, I'm gonna go to my camera view with rendered mode, and on my right, I'm gonna be in 3D view with solid view enabled. So what I'm gonna do is, now that it's been rotated, you can actually move this around to make sure it's pointing at your car. And then I'm gonna go ahead and, I think I'm gonna move it a little further away from my car and turn this scale up quite a bit. Something like that, I think, would work well. Now, we can't really see what shadows are being cast on here by our light because we disabled our ground plane. But our ground plane, because it's a shadow catcher, isn't really working. So we're actually gonna create our own new ground plane just for testing purposes, kind of like what we did in the last episode. So I'm gonna go ahead and add a mesh and plane. I'm gonna go ahead and just scale that way up and try to get, actually, I'm gonna scale it down the wide, try to get it lined up at least kind of generally with what our other ground plane is. Maybe scale it down a bit too, just so we can kind of see it there. And what I'll do, just for lighting purposes, I wanna make this look as much like the actual floor as possible. So I'll go ahead and go to my materials section, add a new material, and without even going to the nodes, I'm just gonna choose this base color and choose my eyedropper and choose the color of the asphalt. And that will give us a general close color. That way we can at least kind of see what the shadows may look like. Also, I'm gonna turn up the roughness all the way up because asphalt is not very reflective. Okay, now that we've got that set up, we can look at our lamp here. And if we turn our lamp on and off, oh, first of all, I think I accidentally put the lamp in the car collection, so I'm gonna take that out and put it inside just the foreground for right now. So if we look at our area lamp, when I turn it on and off, nothing really changes, and that's because by default, area lamps have a very low power setting of 10 watts. So I'm gonna change that to like 2,000 watts. Because I think that's gonna work a little bit better because this is the sun, so it's supposed to be really bright. Okay, so now what you can actually do is select your lamp, and if you scale it down a whole bunch, you can actually see the shadows get much harder here on the left. Now you can see we have a lot of really sharp, hard shadows, but if we scale it up really big, these shadows really soften up. So you have a lot of control over the softness of your shadows. That's why I prefer to use area lamps versus the sun, because if you use a sun lamp, it will always be hard. Now, what you want to do here is match the type of shadows in your scene with the type of shadows in your video footage. So what I mean by that is if you have a bunch of really harsh sunlight and really hard shadows, you want to use really hard shadows on your car to make it match. So here in this, we can actually see the shadows of our trees are pretty soft. They're not really that hard. The sun was out, but it was kind of a soft light. So I'm gonna go ahead and just mess with the scale until the shadows of my car sort of match the sharpness of the shadows of those trees. Again, nothing here is really exact. It's much more of an art form, but you just want to make sure it looks right to the eye and sort of the shadows fit in the scene. So I think something like that would work pretty well. And just looking at my overall exposure there, I may want to boost that brightness of the lamp just a bit more. Maybe 2500 might work a bit better. It's just still looking a bit underexposed. Yeah, I think that looks better. Okay, so now another thing we want to do is, if you notice, there's sort of a bunch of shade here, and then the front part of the car should be in the light areas and the back part should be in sort of the shady area, but our exposure is pretty even across the entire car. So what we can do to fix that is actually add a plane in between our lamp and our car to sort of block some of that light to put the back of the car in shade. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm gonna go ahead and add another plane here, and I'm going to move it up on the x-axis, scale it up a bit, rotate on X and type 90 to do 90 degrees, and go ahead and move it over here and just kind of rotate it in between my car and the light. And I'm gonna go ahead and scale it up a good bit and then scale it even more on the Z axis. I said Z again. Anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and rotate this around being the same angle as our light. And what I'm gonna do is just kind of line myself up with the light and kind of move this around until I think it's just kind of blocking the light just on the back of the car, but not the front. So now if you look at our rendered view here, the back of the car is sort of falling off into a bit of shadow, and the front of the car is still bright and being affected by the sunlight. It's kind of a subtle thing, but it really will help to try to match the lighting in your car as much as possible to the lighting in your actual footage. So you can really spend a lot of time tweaking lighting here, but I think for this would be perfectly sufficient. I would totally be happy with this. But again, if you had more complicated lighting setups, like you were shooting at night with lamps, you'd have to really make sure that you match your lighting as much as possible. So this is a pretty easy scene to match because it's just basically one light source. But you could get a lot more complicated with this if you wanted to, if you were shooting some footage that required it. It's also best to hop around different frames of your footage to make sure that everything lines up well. You want to make sure it looks good and correct from all sides. But I think this looks really good. Now we have a slight problem here. As you can see, our plane that we're using to cast shadows is actually in the view of our camera, so we don't want that. So with that selected, we can go ahead and go to the object settings, which is this orange square, and go all the way down to visibility, and then in that you can actually uncheck ray visibility camera. That way the camera won't see it, but it will still affect the lighting in the scene. Alright, also one quick thing, I don't think I really want the headlights of the car to be on, because as you can see they actually do have an emission, a little light inside those headlights. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and go into solid view real quick, and I'm going to go ahead and hide the headlights here, I'm going to select this little circle, which is the emission object that the car is using to project that light. I'm going to go ahead and find that in my car collection, icosphere, and I'm going to go ahead and I needed to not only disable it in the viewport, but also disable it in the rendered mode. So if you hit this little T icon up here, you can turn on show the render toggle, and then you can toggle it off in render, and go ahead and do the same thing with the other one. If you select the sphere, it's right below it, and go ahead and turn it off in the rendered and viewport. Now this is a personal decision of mine. You could of course, if you want your headlights to be on, you don't have to do this, but I think in this scene it makes sense to have the headlights off. Alright, now I'm going to do Option H to unhide everything that's hidden. That actually did re-enable the headlights, but it's just in the viewport, the render was still disabled, so that's what matters. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and delete this sort of test ground plane that I created, because we don't need that anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And this is our real ground plane here, and I'm going to go ahead and just line that up again. So I think we don't need it that far forward. I think we can kind of move it back here, scale it down a little bit, move it over here, maybe scale it up in the Y a bit more, make it a bit wider. Now if you're wondering why when you look at the camera view, your planes are doing this weird thing where you're kind of seeing the HDRI behind your background, that's a pretty easy fix. We'll do that when we go to Composite. We'll go ahead and fix that error. So that's about it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you have any questions about what I did in this or any of the tutorials in the comment section below. And in the next episode, we'll be looking at rendering our image into an image sequence. And then in the last episode, we'll be looking at final compositing techniques to make our car look as realistic as possible. I'm Josiah. Thanks for watching. These videos are taking a long time to make, so you better be enjoying them.